my presentation today is really about advocacy 101, and it's really kind of how to make the State House work for you from an advocacy perspective. And I organized my presentation this way. I sort of talk about the 3 Ps, and we're going to talk about that today. The P of politics, the P of process, the P of personalities, and the P of persuasion. I should say that what I'm going to share with you today is, we'll just say that this is off the record. The reason I do that is because it allows me the opportunity to really share with you without being concerned that I might be quoted in some sort of article or something along those lines. So, we have everybody nodding in agreement that this is, kind of an off the record presentation. So, always start my presentation the same way I always talk about my nephew. When he was 7 years old, he said, "Uncle Charles, what do you do for a living?" I thought to myself, how do I explain to a 7-year-old what a lobbyist is? Because it's hard to explain to an adult what a lobbyist is. And then I thought I might do it this way. I might say to him, suppose you wanted to get a cookie from your mom, what would you do? And he'd say, I'd say, "Mommy, I've been good. Mommy, it's just one. Mommy, I'll have it after dinner." And I'd say, well, that's what Uncle Charles does. He helps people get cookies by helping them make those arguments. But when I said to him, suppose you wanted to get a cookie, what would you do? He didn't say any of those things. Without missing a beat, he said, "I'd cry." And I thought to myself, well, that's pretty funny, because I can't really go up to the Speaker or the Senate President and just start crying and expect that they're going to do whatever we need to do for our client. But the reason I shared, I apologize if you hear stuff in the background, that's upstairs with my boys. My nephew really did understand the field of lobbying better than I thought he did, right? Because what he's basically saying is, look, Uncle Charles, you set the goals to get a cookie, right? If I cry, I get a cookie, right? I know what buttons to push. That's my mother, right? I'm a little boy, right? She's a mom, right? And if I cry, I get a cookie. To test that theory, you might even hear some crying upstairs, because it really does work. There's a lot of crying in our household, and the reason there's crying is because it works, right? But my nephew was basically saying, it's all about relationships, right? His relationship with his mother allows him the ability to get that cookie just by crying, right? We all have different kinds of relationships, right? And to sort of distill lobbying down to sort of one theme, it really is about relationships. It's about a bunch of other things, but the primary vehicle by which things get done in an advocacy arena is through relationships. And what's interesting to think about is that my nephew is now, when is he, like 28, 29. He's got 2 kids of his own. And if he cries for a cookie now, my sister's just going to laugh at him and say, go pull out your credit card, and buy yourself a case of cookies. Right? Still mother, son, but different evolving relationship. And that's what happens also in the field of advocacy as well. Ideally, our relationships deepen, they become stronger. Someone who was just an acquaintance, after 10 years of interaction becomes more than an acquaintance, right? Becomes, someone who you have an ongoing relationship with, right? And so when I go to see somebody at the State House, right, who I've worked with for many, many years, right, I come with that, kind of good baggage, the baggage that allows me to be successful. Of course, what we all know is that there are people coming in all the time into the legislature. Someone gave me some statistic, like, over the last 5 years, like 25% of the State House is turned over. That's pretty significant. So you always have to build relationships in the field of advocacy. All right, let's jump in here with the first P, and that's the P of politics, right? The P of politics, basically says that everything that happens in an advocacy realm is done within the context of a political environment, right? I mean, we certainly see that in Washington, right? If you had a good piece of legislation, a great idea that you turned into a bill, right? In some way it would be impacted by what's going on in Washington, right? If it was Democrats who really liked your idea, right, it could be stopped by Republicans who would want to oppose it, right? So, so the P of politics in Washington is very, very clear. It's a little less defined in Massachusetts because we have a Democratic legislature, overwhelmingly Democratic legislature. And now we have a governor who's also a Democrat. So the kind of Republican Democratic schism isn't as pronounced as it might be. It still is relevant, right? For example, if you were looking to move a piece of legislation that has some bearing on undocumented immigrants in Massachusetts, right? The P of politics would loom large. Why? You'd have 30 Republicans in the legislature out of 200 who would presumably oppose something. Let's just say it's in-state tuition for undocumented high school kids, which actually, I'm now working on again. It's a very important issue, and it's an issue that that I have found extremely rewarding. We're talking about some of the best and the brightest students in Massachusetts who are not allowed to attend our colleges and universities at the in-state tuition rate, only because they're not considered technically residents of Massachusetts because they're undocumented. But they have no say in coming to this country. They came in tow from their parents, and yet they're prevented from the in-state tuition rate. So no matter how worthy this issue is, you probably would have some Republicans out there who would say, I don't like this issue. Now that's 30 out of 200 who needs them, except, okay, that the Speaker of the House and the Senate President know, okay, that 2 years from now, right, the Republican Party of Massachusetts, not just those individuals, but the Republican Party will run against members on those kinds of issues, right? So the Speaker's job is to protect the membership. The Senate President's job is to protect the members from so-called difficult votes, right? And this could presumably be a difficult vote, something that that the members would have to defend when it comes time for re-election. So that's the P of politics that is looming over this issue, right? You go to the Speaker and say, I've got this great issue, in-state tuition, and they're going to say, yeah, but what about the politics of this, right? How are we going to deal with the politics of it, right? So it's very important to keep that P in mind when you're working on an issue, right? Some issues you might want to have bipartisan support for that reason. Be able to go to the speakers and the president and say, listen, I've got Republicans and Democrats who are in support of this thing. So let's take the P of politics off the table. You may not want to do this for other reasons, but it shouldn't be because of politics. But I also want you to think of politics in a more expansive way, right? Because most things in Massachusetts are between Democrats, right? Most of the competitive races are at the primary level in Massachusetts, right? If you were a person who wanted to break into politics, what you might end up doing is challenging an incumbent, right? And you could say that incumbent is not progressive enough, and I'm going to challenge them because I think I can do a better job, and that would happen at the primary level. So the P of politics is really about ambition, right? It basically says everybody in the legislature has to run for re-election every 2 years. And so they're either thinking about their re-election or they're thinking about their next position in the State House, right? Or beyond the State House, right? So they're thinking about their careers, right? It's funny. The Healy administration, surprisingly, at this point, is only tapped one legislator for their administration. John Santiago, who's a state rep from Boston, is the new Veterans Services Secretary. But it's possible that she will tap some other people. And we know that there are members of the legislature who have reached out to her about seeking a position in her administration. Right? That's politics, right? Every individual is sort of thinking about what are their next steps, right? And I always give the example: if you were the executive director of a nonprofit in New Bedford focused on the fishing industry, and you brought together a collective. I'm going to talk to you while I get some water. But if you brought everybody together, the state reps from New Bedford along with the state senator, and let me ask you this question: who is the state senator from New Bedford? I'll get some water while someone, don't look it up. Don't look it up. Don't Google it. All right, come on. Who is it?
I thought we had somebody from New Bedford on the call now.
Taunton's close, but not New Bedford.
Fair enough.
It's Mark Montigny, and someone's going to say to me, oh, but, how are we supposed to know who he is? Like, there's so many of them. Mark Montigny's been there for 30 years. Or close to it. He's been the state senator for the last 30 years. I always tell my interns when we do presentations like this for them, you wouldn't go to a Red Sox game without knowing at least most of the players. Right? You can't expect to do advocacy at the State House unless you know most of the players. Right? Now, maybe you won't know every House member, but there's only 40 members of the Senate. You kind of need to know who the 40 members of the Senate are. Back to New Bedford. If you were going to bring together Mark Montigny together with a bunch of the reps to talk about the fishing industry, presumably they would all be in the same page, right? They don't care about New Bedford, they care about the fishing industry. But what happens if Montigny decides he's not going to run for re-election? Who's going to run for that seat? Likely some state reps, right? And so these state reps who are actually working together in support of New Bedford will likely be opponents of one another for that state Senate seat, right? So imagine, if you're working in a company, right, and you day in and day out working with people, you might even commute to work with some people, but if you knew that there's a position out there that might open up, right, within the office, right, then you might not be so open on everything, Leverett references the flashcards. Yes, we had an intern who took to heart the notion of learning all the names of the reps and senators and made flashcards. And when I had a position open and she applied for it, she got it in a heartbeat. We've now been working together for pretty much as partners for the last 10 years. When she got the job, she came into the office for the first time as a paid employee and found the flashcards that she had made sitting in a desk. They were a little outdated, but now every now and then we have interns who actually take that story to heart and create the flashcards for themselves. But the key is you got to learn who the players are. We'll talk about that when we get to the issue of people and process. All right, so that's the importance of politics, is kind of recognizing. And by the way, if you were in New Bedford and not executive director, I'm not suggesting you need to say that. You're not going to sit there and say, I know if Mark Montigny, doesn't run for re-election, that one of you guys are going to challenge, are going to be competing with one another. But just knowing about the P of politics makes you a better advocate. Just knowing that people have to run every 2 years makes you a better advocate, right? If you can get into the shoes of the people that you are lobbying, you will be a much more effective advocate. I had a speech teacher who said, All communication is audience oriented. She said, let me say that for a second time. All communication is audience oriented. She said, let me say that for a third time. All communication is audience oriented, right? You know, I love that, right? She said it 3 times because the point was all communication is audience oriented. If your audience does not hear you, you have not communicated, right? They need to hear you, right? So you need to make sure that they hear you. So you need to get into the heads of your audience. Your audience is that 200 legislators plus the administration, you know, plus the staff, right? That's your audience. Get to know them, understand, you know, how they operate and what's important to them. And certainly one of the most important things is, you know, looking good and being able to advance in their position. So, so I love the comments from Leverett. So let me say, you know, one last thing about politics. There's also the politics of institutions, right? And so we have a bicameral legislature, which means we have, you know, two branches or two branches of the legislature. We have a House and we have a Senate, right? And each of them acts as if they are the top dog, right? You know, if you ask a House member who's really in charge of what goes on at the State House, they'll tell you the House. If you ask members of the Senate, they'll say we're the upper branch, you know, we're where the action is. Right. And so it's kind of like Yankees, Red Sox, you know, you're either a Yankees fan or a Red Sox fan. You can't be both. Right. So, you know, if you're in the Senate, you know, you are loyal to the Senate. And if you're in the House, you're loyal to the House. So it's really important to keep that in mind. You know, I had a client who was giving the Senate Chair of Ways and Means a tour today. And he said, you know, any advice? And I said, well, you know, my most important advice is don't mention the House. Don't mention anything about the House to the Chair of Ways and Means. Just treat the Chair of Ways and Means in the Senate as if he's the most important person in the world, right? And never mention the House. And God forbid, you should actually say, oh, and by the way, the House really likes us and the Chair of Ways and Means on the House side really likes us. And that would be terrible, right? The reason it would be terrible is because then the Senate would hold your organization hostage. Oh, you know, the House likes your stuff. Well, we'll just hold on to it and they'll trade us for something. When Stan Rosenberg became the Senate president, he was a very big supporter of UMass. He was a graduate of UMass, Amherst. He credits the UMass system with giving him his start. When he became Senate president, the House budget came out first before the Senate, as it always does, and they decimated the UMass budget. It was as if they hated the UMass budget. Of course, they didn't hate UMass, but they knew that Stan Rosenberg was the Senate president, and they knew that Stan Rosenberg really wanted to have a lot of money go towards UMass. So they said, we'll underfund UMass, right? And we know that Stan Rosenberg is going to trade us a ton of things in order to be able to get the numbers where he wants them to be. That's the politics of institutions, right? You know, each institution has its own politics, and you need to be aware of it, right? The best advice I would give is just treat each branch as equals, right? You're going to do an event, you're going to do something in a newsletter, and you're going to quote a House member, quote the Senate member too, right? You're going to do an event, you know, and you're going to give out an award, give out one to the House and one to the Senate. You know, don't do something just for one branch. In this day and age of tweeting and all sorts of stuff, you will get called out on it. I have seen it happen. It's happened with clients of mine. They tweet something out about the House, and the next thing you know, someone from the Senate is getting upset. And you know, like, how come you didn't mention us? You know, and it's like, oh my goodness. So just make sure that you are, you know, talking to both at the same time and treating both of them as equals. All right. So that's the P of politics. Let's move on to the P, and I'll save a little bit of time for questions. So if you've got something, just write it down. Let's go on to the P of process. The P of process basically says this is a challenging and difficult process. Just for example, one of the people in my office today, the House did a supplemental budget today, and there was something that we were interested in, and my colleague Kate had asked people in our office, like, so can you pull up what they did in the amendment that was passed, right? And if you look at the amendment, there's some language in there, and they list some numbers, like amendment numbers. And one of the staffers said, "Oh, great news! It seems like our amendment was included because the number is there. They include it." And Kate rightfully said to the rest of the staff, like, "No, that's not how it works, right? You're only included if the language is included. If they put your amendment number in the consolidated amendment, it doesn't mean anything. It just means that they're capturing your amendment. But if they don't put the language of the amendment into the consolidated, then you haven't gotten what you were looking for." So it was bad news because it wasn't in there. That's P of process. Understanding that process is extremely important. At this point in my presentation, I always do the same thing, and I really want to do this now too. I'd like to do a quick role play around the budget, which is very relevant because today the governor introduced her budget, which is sort of the official start of the budget process in Massachusetts. When the governor, in this case, it's just a nice thing to say these days, when she, not him, but she releases her budget. So I'd like to do a quick, if we could, role play. So for this, I need someone who wants to be a state senator and another person who would like to be an advocate. And the only criteria for the advocate is it needs to be something in the state budget, not something in Washington, something that gets funded at the state level. So who would like to jump into this?
Come on, anybody. We definitely do not have a shy class. So anybody want to fund childcare? Hint, hint. Anybody? No? Okay. Well,
Okay, I'll volunteer.
How did you know I was hinting? How did that come out? How did that work? Sorry about that.
Okay. No pressure.
Anybody want to be a legislator? Actually, yeah. Somebody wanted to, somebody in their application, somebody wanted to run for something, but I will not call that person out. But anybody want to be the legislator? Senator or representative?
Don't make me pick somebody.
I can do it.
Dev. Oh, that's right. Dev
Terrific.
didn't get a chance to introduce himself. He's with Common Cause. So Dev.
Oh, terrific.
Yep.
Great. So Dev, you're going to be the state senator. Okay. Senator Dev. It's got a nice ring to it. And remind me who's going to be the advocate?
Jessica.
Jessica. Okay, Jessica, what's your issue?
So the issue that I bring to the table is childcare and low teacher wages.
Terrific. Okay, great. So, so Jessica, this is a virtual meeting. So, you're meeting with you're meeting with the senator. Go for it.
Hi, Senator. How are you today?
Pretty good. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for meeting me. It's such an honor to have a one-on-one with the senator and have this time to advocate for early childcare. So my name is Jessica Giuseppe Acevedo. I am a third-year PhD in UMass Boston. I'm really focused on early education, care, and policy. I also am an owner of a family childcare program. I've been operating for the last 6 years. So during COVID, we actually closed for 172 days. I have been in contact with Congresswoman Catherine Clark, who has been an advocate, but we really do need more people at the local level to support really advocating for line item annually, but really thinking about how we're gonna use ARPA money and all the state and federal funding that's coming our way. Do you have any questions for me? No?
Do you have any questions for her?
It's role play, right? Like they would talk
Exactly,
to me back.
yes.
Yeah, what amount of funding are you looking for?
So I'm just looking about more fun in regards to like the budgeting and the budgeting process and how teachers can advocate and be more in regards to the process and participatory of where those funds are going and how we can have more transparency for teachers. Also thinking about long-term sustainability. So what are your goals and your plans?
That all sounds very very compelling and important. Thank you for the work that you've been doing.
Do you know what a daycare is?
I don't really know what a daycare is. Can you tell?
Okay, so if you want to come to my program, feel free to stop by at any time.
Here you go. Senator, your next appointment is here, so we're gonna have to say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Jessica. My next appointment is here. I gotta run.
Sorry.
But thank you so much for your work.
Awesome. Let's give both of them a round of applause. And particularly, Jessica, you did a great job of just sort of jumping right into this, and I love the passion that you bring to this. You exude passion for this, and I always say to our clients, I can do lots of things. I have lots of relationships and stuff, but I can't bring the passion and the understanding of the issues the way you can. And you clearly did that. I think you scared the senator a little bit. And ran back into his office, and closed the door.
So is the approach too hard, or?
Well, everybody has their own way of doing things. I have one client who's a little too combative, and I like to keep him at home, because it doesn't. That's not my style. But everybody has their own way, and actually, I say that to the people who work with me. You want to create your own style of lobbying. And everybody reacts differently in different ways. I think you did a terrific job. I want to sort of critique it in this way. And the way I'll critique it is just by telling you the origins of the role play that I do. Is that we represent the METCO program. You might not know it, but it's a voluntary busing program, voluntary desegregation program, which has been around for over 50 years, and an extraordinary program that has given thousands of opportunities to kids to get great education, and just as importantly, diversified our student base in our suburban communities. When I first started working with METCO, I wanted to get a sense of how the parents advocated for this, because these are parents who wake up their kids at 5:30 in the morning to put their kids on a bus. So the parents are really passionate, as like you, Jessica, passionate about their issues. So I sat in on a meeting with them and a state senator, and they came into the meeting and said, "Senator, we just want you to, we're METCO parents, and we want you to support the program." And the senator said, "I support the program. I love METCO. I'll vote for METCO, when it comes up in the budget." And I was thinking, I don't really understand what that means, because there really isn't a vote on METCO. That's not how it would kind of work. And the parents left, kind of feeling really good that they had secured this person and his commitment. And I was really upset because that senator had frankly taken advantage of them, And the reason I know that is because my meeting with that senator would be very different, right? So my meeting with the senator would go a little bit like this. Senator, I want to thank you for your support of the METCO program. Last year, we secured, we had a line item of $28 million. This year, we're trying to bump that up by $1 million to $29 million. We'd like you to prioritize that increase of $1 million for the MECO program in the upcoming Senate budget. We know that you will be meeting with the chair of Ways and Means on the Senate side soon, because every member of the Senate meets with the chair of Ways and Means. And by the way, just so you know, those meetings have begun, right now. So the chair of Ways and Means is meeting with members of the Senate right now about their budget priorities. Even though the Senate budget isn't done until May, they're meeting now. Right. So I'd say, Senator, I know that you have a meeting coming up with the chair of Ways and Means, and I'd like this to be one of your priorities. Oh, and I'd also like, I know that there's a letter that goes from you to the chair of Ways and Means, because something as important as the budget, you wouldn't just, communicate, verbally, you would, and orally, you would put it in writing. So I'd like that MECO increase to be included in your letter to the chair of Ways and Means. Oh, and it'd be really great if I could get a copy of that letter too. Now, they don't need to give you that letter because it's a private communication between them and another legislative office. And I've had legislators who pissed at me for telling people that there's a letter. I was like, Charles, don't tell people there's a letter. It's like, what do you mean don't tell people? So I have to say they don't have to give it to you. But you can ask for the letter, right? And when you ask for that letter, okay, people kind of get freaked out. It's like, oh my goodness, they know that there's a letter, that goes out, right? But when you ask for that letter, it puts you in a totally different category. It puts you in the category of like a seasoned lobbyist and not someone who's just a, kind of a volunteer, right? So that's sort of how my meeting would go. And, and so Jessica, you brought an extraordinary amount of passion to it. But the senator was sort of alluding to it, right? Dev was sort of alluding to it. What is it that you're asking for, right? And I think that's the kind of thing when you go into a meeting with anybody, really want to know what is your ask, because they're expecting it, right? They meet with people every day, and there's always an ask, And so what is the ask that you're looking for? And this is also where it's important to kind of do some research, and this is great for you because you're a PhD student, right? So you're used to doing tons of research, right? But research the line items that are related to childcare, right? What are the sources of funding that fund childcare in Massachusetts, right? And that way you sort of know what you're asking for. Hey, we want an increase in this line item that funds this thing, and this is what we're doing with that money. In the childcare space. So, kudos to you, Jessica, did a terrific job. My only suggestion would be, to tighten it up, be specific, come out with your ask, and then ask them to prioritize it, see if it gets to be one of the 5, things of priorities. Everybody gets something at the State House. They really do. Even Republicans, will get something, but they might only get one thing. Or 2 things, and so you're the number 1 priority for a Republican, you might get that, so, and someone in leadership might get many more items, but get people to prioritize your issues. And if you can get multiple people to prioritize it, then that's even better, right? So with the MECO program, right, there's many MECO communities around the state. There's many legislators who support the MECO program, so our goal is to get as many legislators to go to the chair of Ways and Means and say, Mr. Chairman, MECO is a priority for me, right? And if the chair of Ways and Means on the House and the Senate side hear MECO, and MECO from a few other people, for them, it's really easy, because they got to try to satisfy the needs of their members, right? And if they're hearing from, 20 people, it's like, okay, let's do a MECO increase and 20 people will be happy with us, as a result of it. So the last thing I would say on the P of process is sort of, I'd share another story that for me just completely encapsulates the importance of understanding the legislative process. When I first started out in this work, I was working on a bill. I can't remember the exact nature of the bill, but I got it out of committee And then, and this was when I was working for the Jewish community. I spent 7 years working for the Jewish community in Massachusetts. And then in 2001, I took them on as a client. And they've been a client ever since. And, we now have something like 40 something, other clients. But I was working on something for them, and I'd gotten a bill out of committee. And then, towards the end of the session, the chairman of the committee, told me that the bill had been recommitted. And I was like, oh, okay, not really knowing what that meant, and basically what it means is the speaker doesn't like the bill, or the Senate president, but usually the speaker, and has asked the chairman to put that bill back into his committee. So, and I didn't fully understand it, so nothing really happened, and that bill kind of died for that session. The next time, there was another bill that I was working on. It was a buddy of mine, who was an employment attorney, who basically said, Charles, here's the problem. He said, I'd love for you to work on this bill. We have a law in Massachusetts called the Wage Act. It's the law that protects every person's wages. It basically says that if you don't get paid your wage, and you go to court, you're entitled, the law says, to damages, including triple damages. What does that mean? What does the comma including triple damages mean? It doesn't say shall get triple damages. It doesn't say may get triple damages. It says, you're entitled to triple damages. You're entitled to damages, including triple damages. And he said, look, most judges interpret that as mandatory. I want to make it clear in the law that it should be mandatory, right? So we want to change it and make it shall. And I said, well, why is this important? And he said, well, here's why it's important. If I'm a business owner, right? Someone comes to me and says, hey, you owe me $5,000, I've looked at my paycheck, you've been stiffing me, you owe me $5,000. As a business owner, I can say to them, you know what, go sue me. Take me to court. You don't have the money for a lawyer anyways. Take me to court. And if you win, right, what are you going to get? $5,000, right? But so here's $2,500. Here's half, right? Take it or leave it, right? And most people, because they need the money, would take the $2,500. Now, the triple damages is really great, because if you go to that same, employer and say, listen, you owe me $5,000, and he says, what do I care? Best you can do is get 5,000, and you say, no, read the law. The law says that if I win, I get $15,000, right? If I win my case. Now the employer says, oh boy, do I really want to risk this? I'm going to pay him what he's owed, right? I'm going to pay him the $5,000, right? That's why triple damages is so important. Anyways, we get the bill out of committee. And then a few weeks later, the same chairman comes over to me and says, Charles, bad news, the bill got recommitted. So I paused for a second and I said, actually, that's not bad news, that's good news. And he said, Charles, don't you understand what recommitted means? It means the speaker has a problem with it. I said, I understand that. I said, it's good news because now we have a reason to meet with the speaker. All right, let's sit down with him and convince him, right? So he said, good point. So we sat down with the speaker. It was a totally different speaker than the current speaker, totally different speaker than the previous speaker. We convinced the speaker to do this, and he signed off on it. The next thing you know, the bill flew through, and we got it signed into law. And a few months after the law was signed, you open up the newspaper and it read Walmart settles a $40 million lawsuit on behalf of their employees. Right, $40 million going back into the pockets of the Walmart employees. Why? Because the attorneys who took that case, said to Walmart, well, there's a new law in the books. Do you really want to pay $120 million? And they said, no, we'll just pay the $40 million that, you say that we owe the employees, and that's how they got the $40 million. And I love it's one of my favorite stories. One, because it certainly feels really good to know that all those employees, as well as everybody else in the Commonwealth who has benefited from this law, benefits from the work that we do, right? Someone would say, like, why does your work matter? Well, it certainly matters to that person I will never meet, right? Who has a wage case, right? And who gets paid the wage that they've worked hard for, right? Because of the law that we help change and enforce, But I also love the story because it talks about the importance of process, right? If the chair of that committee had come to me and said, Charles, the bill got recommitted, and I said, what the hell was recommitted, and not understand it, then we would never have this thing go into motion where we actually got the bill passed, So it really tells the story about the importance of understanding the P of process. All right, let's move on to the next P, the P of people. This is a real quick one. The P of people basically says that everybody in the Commonwealth is different. Everybody in the legislature is different. Everybody in the Commonwealth is different too, but everybody in the legislature is different. And they have different passions and interests, and you should treat them with a sort of a perspective of being an individual, right? We've done a lot of work with the dental hygienists in Massachusetts, and when I first started working with them, and they started to talk a little bit about what they wanted to do and the importance of oral health. And I said to them, oh, you've got to talk to Harley Chandler, the state senator at the time from Worcester. And they said, oh, no, we can't talk to her. And I said, what do you mean you can't talk to her? They said, oh, she files all the bills for the dentists. I said, she files the bills for the dentist because she cares about oral health. You've not approached her, so the only group in town that focuses on oral health are the dentists. You need to reach out to her and explain to her what you're interested in doing. And she became the biggest champion for the dental hygienist. But it was, you have to know that Harriet Chandler cares a lot about, well, she's now retired, but, at the time, about that she cared about oral health. So one of the things that we spent a lot of time on is really trying to ferret out and identify, who cares about what issues. You can learn a lot about, what people care about by looking at the bills that they file, right? That's one way, right? So, if I said to you, there's this issue around PFAS, right? And these forever chemicals in water, right? And we really want to do something, in the space of PFAS and stuff, who should we talk to, right? Well, I would know immediately who to talk to, as a first step. And that would be Kate Hogan, who's the Speaker pro tem, right? Why? Because she's chaired commissions on PFAS. She's filed bills on PFAS. If you do a search, for bills on PFAS, you'll see her name attached to it. Be the first person I would talk to, right? Because, few people have been bigger champions and advocates for dealing with the issue of PFAS than she has been. So, this is, we tend to paint legislators and policymakers with the same brushstrokes, and say that they're all the same. And it's important for us to really try to identify, what is it that people really care about? It's kind of funny, right? The speaker, it's very clear some of the things that the speaker has been most animated by. We have sports betting, right? It was very clear last session, that the speaker was really pushing for sports betting in Massachusetts, right? Let's take a look at the Senate president. What does she care about? Oh, mental health, right? So it was, not surprising that the Senate president basically said to the speaker, if you want a sports betting bill to pass the Senate this year, we're going to need to have a mental health bill, right? Because that was her priority, right? And so when we talk about leadership, right? If you care about mental health, say what you will, but Karen Spilka, did hold up the, sports wagering bill until she got a commitment from the speaker that they would bring up a mental health bill. That's not to say the speaker doesn't care about mental health or the House doesn't care about it, But they knew that, Karen spoke of, prioritize mental health. And, they had other priorities. But that's how a deal came about. That's why we got sports betting. And we also got a mental health bill, a very good mental health bill. So that's all part of the P of people and understanding, people. So study people, study what they care about. Look at the bills that they filed, right? Because very often one of the first things, when the client, when we start working with a client, they're like, who should we go to, right? Who's going to be our champion, right? And if you're going to file an amendment, who are you going to go to for something? We're always scouring and saying, okay, who cares about this particular issue? We're working with the Red Cross, right? Very clear, Bill Driscoll comes from a disaster preparedness background, right? We're going to go to him, right? There was a bill, remember I told you that Wage Act protects everybody in Massachusetts. Guess what? There's a small loophole in that bill. For some reason, hospital workers are exempt from the Wage Act. Ask the lawyers why. They don't know. So we filed a bill to include hospital workers. Who's going to file the bill for you, right? Who should we go to, right? If you say nursing, right, on the House side, one person primarily comes to mind, and that's Denise Garlick. She's a nurse. There are very few issues related to nurses that she's not involved in. So of course, that was the first person we would go to, to talk about this particular issue. That's the P of personalities. The last P is the P of persuasion, right? And that's the P that my nephew was really, that I thought my nephew would employ, right? How to make a good argument, right? And we know that that it's important to have the P of understand the P of process, the P of politics, and the P of people. But you also have to make a persuasive argument for the most part for the things that you care about, right? We know that there are there's different components to a persuasive argument, right? There's logos, which is the logical component of an argument. That's putting your data together, crunching your numbers, making that kind of case. There's pathos, right? That's the emotional appeal of an argument, right? We have a client, it's a group of parents who have been working on a bill focused on a health issue called CMV. CMV is a virus. It's a very common virus, and all of us have probably had CMV when we were adults. Problem is when you have CMV and you are carrying a baby, if the CMV is passed on to the baby, it can have devastating consequences. Deafness, blindness, all sorts of things, including potentially death. And we have one client who, and the parents are looking for mandatory screening of CMV, when the baby is born, because there's a lot of things that you can do, right at birth that you can't do later on. Well, one of the parents will join us for this, and will share her story of the child that died in her arms at the age of 4 months old. I've heard the story 30 times so far. There's not a single time that I don't cry, or get emotional in some capacity, just thinking of that image. If we get that bill, it's going to be because of the story that she shares. A few years ago, we had the opportunity to work on something called the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which was a bill that would provide basic protections to pregnant women, because being pregnant is not a disability. It's not covered by ADA, a regular pregnancy. And at a fundraiser, not unlike the fundraiser we did this morning, we did it with the previous speaker, Bob DeLeo, and we invited someone to come with us. And it was a hotel worker who shared her story with the speaker of how when she was 29 weeks pregnant, she asked for lighter duty. They gave her more duty and she miscarried, more heavy things to carry. The speaker had just become a grandfather for the first time and was visibly moved by that story. 3 weeks later, I got a call from his chief of staff saying, Charles, the speaker is throwing his support publicly behind that bill at the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce breakfast tomorrow. You might want to be in the room to hear him throw his support behind that bill. And that bill moved forward. In fact, as luck would have it, my son was born on the same day as that bill was taken up in the House. And then a few months later, when he was 3 months old, he was at the bill signing for that bill. So I sort of intertwined with that bill on a personal level. But the reason that happened is because of the woman who shared her story. And I feel terrible for what happened, but she, through that story, single-handedly, right, has allowed for the protections, basic protections from others, so that does not happen again ever in Massachusetts. That's pathos, right? That's the power of telling an emotional story. The last piece for a persuasive argument is the ethos, and that's the ethical appeal of the deliverer, right? And that's an interesting piece. It basically says, look, it's important to be logical, it's important to be emotional, but we're all persuaded by the stature of the person who is making the argument, right? The ethical appeal of the deliverer, right? So the classic example of this is that when the doctors come up to the State House for their day at the State House, the Mass Medical Society has their day at the State House, all the doctors come in their white coats. Why? Because they've just come from clinic, but because the white coat confers authority, right? So they sit in on these meetings, right? And legislators and legislative staffers look at them, and in the back of their mind, right, everything that they say is, not suspect. It must be believable because these are doctors, right? The ethical appeal of the deliverer. So when you're working on a bill, right, try to have some really great logical arguments, right, in support when you're coming up to the State House to testify or doing a fact sheet. Try to have persuasive, passionate, emotional appeal to a particular issue, and try to have people deliver that message who are credible, right? Get some people who are believable to testify in support of your bill. That's the kind of ethical appeal of the deliverer. If we had more time, I would go into what I call the science of persuasion. There's a guy named Robert Cialdini who has written a book called Influence, and he talks about the science of persuasion. You can look him up, you can read his stuff. It's really interesting. He doesn't talk about it from a lobbying perspective. It's all about business, how business executives convince people how to do things. Like for example, he has different principles, and there's a principle of liking. People tend to agree with people that they like, right? And the classic example, by the way, that's also, that can also be challenging too, because if you're not liked or you're not part of the same cohort, then you're not believed or persuadable. But the classic example is Tupperware, right, where you purchase things because the host is someone you like, right, and you want to help out the host. So, yes, the product might be good, but the vast majority of people who purchase things through Tupperware, are purchasing it because they like the host and they want to please the host, right? So it's a whole business model based on the principle of liking and the influence that liking has, on purchases. So look up Robert Cialdini, because I think a lot of the things that he talks about are relatable to the field of advocacy. And with that, I'll take questions from folks, you know, and then we'll wrap up.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Charles. I saw, Christine's hand shot virtual hand
Yes.
shot right up. Yep. Christine, then Kiki.
Okay.
Please.
Hi. How do you overcome the barrier when they say they'll only talk to your constituent if you're a constituent? And that's not really fair, because how do we get to talk to these committee members and the speaker? And if they immediately say, oh, well, you're not my constituent, I'm not going to talk to you. And Kate Hogan is one of the worst. Like, she won't even let you in the room.
Yeah, you know, people in leadership are okay.
We're still at the meeting?
You know what? I'm still in the meeting. Do you want to say hi?
No.
No, everybody's hearing you. Who's in here? Oh,
What's this?
okay. Oh, that is a good trick. That is a very good trick. All right, I'm gonna come up to watch your trick in a minute, okay? All right. You raise a very good question, Christine. So, you know, one of the things that I would suggest, right, is for many issues that people work on, there are links to constituents, right? So, you know, part of it is like organize a group of constituents. Kate Hogan is a supporter of oral health, and we've gone to her for a lot of things. She's done some really good things in the space of oral health. But when we do it, we actually also include constituents of hers. Find the hygienists who live within her district and who she has a relationship with, right? And that is effective. I think it's unfortunate that sometimes, particularly people in leadership, it is harder to meet with them, than it is with others. So you try to do the best that you can, but some people do have these kinds of rules about not meeting. Although it's rare. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm a lobbyist, so I'm a little more removed from it. People don't they don't duck meetings with me for the most part, and maybe it's because they know I come to their fundraisers and stuff like that. So I get treated differently. I mean, it's one option too. It's just like everybody has a fundraiser, so you can show up to people's events. And have an opportunity to talk to them, there and say, hey, we'd really love to have a meeting with you, and then I'm guaranteed, even if you make a token contribution, you're likely to get a meeting, with that person. So good questions. Kiki, right?
Yep.
Yes.
And then Ginny had a question in the chat after Kiki.
Okay.
Thanks, Charles, for speaking with us tonight. I had a question about the tactical involvement of being a lobbyist. So if you don't have the connections yet and you're beyond like college, you don't have an internship to be able to spend with a lobbying shop, how do folks get lobbying experience? And is it just...
It's a great question. I get asked that a lot. We do have interns who they're fortunate to be able to be in an internship, so they can they can do that. And get some experience that way. And I had a guy who was basically, a lawyer who was meeting with me the other day and said, I really want to go into the field of lobbying. What would you recommend? Well, I wouldn't do it the way I did it. I never worked in state government at all. Don't tell anybody that. I think most people assume that I did at some point. But, that is the best way to get into this field, right? Is to work in the State House, to work in a Healy administration in some capacity. Right. If you want to get involved in the field of lobbying, that's the best thing. And by the way, if you have the ability to do so, right, say, listen, I want to work at the State House, what should I do? Right. I would say there are 3 places other than working in a Healy administration. You work anywhere in a Healy administration, that I think is going to be really good experience, and something you can parlay into something down the line. But in the State House, you want to do, and actually this is part of the Healy administration is A&F. Administration and finance, they're the budget writers, but actually almost all policy goes through A&F, administration and finance. And then on the legislative side, House Ways and Means and Senate Ways and Means. I will say this to you: if you become an analyst at House Ways and Means or Senate Ways and Means, or let's say you are a lawyer and you become counsel, at House Ways and Means, Senate Ways and Means, not only will I come and see you and say, hey, remember when I talked to you? But you will not want for a position in any kind of advocacy role, whether that's working in a nonprofit or working for a lobbying shop, or whatever it is, because it's really gold. It's like getting a PhD. You'll work your tail off, but you'll have the kind of experience that will propel you to an entire career. In this, I can't say enough about the experience of working at Senate Ways and Means and House Ways and Means. You just do a LinkedIn search for everybody who's ever worked at House Ways and Means or Senate Ways and Means. People like Doug Howgate, who's the head of the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, who's a terrific guy. Got his start first in the State House as a staffer, then working at Senate Ways and Means, and then working this in the president's office. And I'm sure he would tell you that that's a great experience. I can only do like one more question, but I really got to go up to be with the kids. But my Leverett's got my email. Feel free to email me. So let's do the last question.
Yep. I think it was Ginny, and then like I mentioned, I saw David's question, and I think Jessica had her hand up. So if you want to email me the questions, I can send those over to Charles. But Ginny's question is, what's a good way to start researching what types of issues the representatives may care about?
So you can go onto the state's website, and take a look at bills that have been filed by them. Many of them also have like newsletters. They have websites, where they talk about like on their campaigns, the things that interest them. But I would say like, looking at the pieces of legislation that people file or budget amendments, you get a really good sense of what people care about. So, and David, your question was, can you speak to what you have seen in the role of community organizing and networking in building broader support to get multiple legislative sponsors? It's a great question, and I do believe that community organizing has a major role to play in getting support and building campaigns for different things. I think about the driver's license campaign, as a perfect example of where that was really a community organizing campaign, that dealt with a very, a challenging issue, right? And that sort of comes to mind of like really great organizing. I think the best situations are one where you have good organizing, sort of from the outside, and good sort of strategic work from the inside. And that campaign also had the same thing. It wasn't just like a group of people bombarding people and, doing all sorts of stuff on the outside, but there was some real good strategic work done on the inside. And the community organizing really complemented that. With that, unfortunately, I need to go. So, but thank you for everything that you guys do, and for participating in this. And I, look forward to staying connected, with many of you. So.
Great.